My goal for this presentation is to explain the inspiration process for my composition. It was a collaboration effort between two of my friends and Adam, who helped me set almost everything up. The central idea is to analyze the social dynamics that emerge from multiple users playing the same instrument. Joint musical collaboration is central to the art. Musicians play together, making use of their shared knowledge and skill to perform complex pieces. This is generally thought to be mostly an auditory experience, but it's more visual than it seems. To an experienced musician, this statement seems obvious. Studies suggest many signifiers are conveyed and received through body language and visual interaction. Instrumentalists in small ensembles occasionally exchange conductor-like gestures to clarify the timing of upcoming beats and facilitate synchronization. This simple display of coordination is understood to have an evolving hierarchy. When privately assigned the role of leader, performers influence their co-performers more and were influenced less than when following. In smaller ensembles, leader/follower roles are not as clearly defined. Performers may take turns building on one another's ideas or contribute equally to shaping a new idea. This idea presents visual coordination as massively important, if not central to the collaborative effort of the performance. The specific study I'm quote pulling from tests this presumption by having a pianist duo perform with and without visual contact. They conclude that while it's certainly helpful to coordinate visually, it is not nearly as useful as the standard auditory information received from playing along to the ensemble. Successful coordination is supported primarily through shared attention to the musical output, later stating that performers choose to interact visually when they have the opportunity and means to do so. We would therefore hypothesize that visual interaction serves as a social motivator. This leaves visual cueing as supplementary, a mere additive to the social experience. Another relevant facet is intention. As per this same study, intention is delineated between shared and individual, defining individual intent as action-based plans that are known to one performer but not necessarily to the others, and action-based plans that overlap between performers, respectively. Individual intent in the context of a garage jam session might look like a lead guitarist preparing to play a solo. The exact notes and emotional contour of the solo is improvised, the guitarist being the only one to truly know what it might sound like. Shared intention would refer to the fact that all band members know that a space for a guitar solo comes after the second chorus. All band members are aware of the upcoming song structure and collaborate accordingly to ensure it goes smoothly. These notions of intent can also be thought of as desired direction for the performance. An individual may want the improvisational jam to work its way into a slower tempo, subtly slowing down in an effort to signal to the others this desire. Intent is easily conveyed in the context of a traditional joint collaboration. Visual cues and body language are easily decoded by experienced musicians, making an improvisational collaboration an experience defined by expression and cooperation, not misunderstanding and disharmony. As per Bailey, the direction of improvisation is directly influenced by the instrumentalist. Their background, technical skill, and interpretation of their co-performer's intention all play a role in the evolution of the performance. The characteristics of freely improvised music are established only by the sonic musical identity of the person or persons playing it. The idea that people influence one another when individually providing an element to the performance is very interesting. What kind of influence can people have on one another when they're playing the same instrument? Simone is a software created as an experimental ground to study various paradigms of collective interaction and their approach by musicians. It allows for multiple users to collaborate on a performance based purely on the auditory information they are receiving, and can be configured to allow for different levels of tonal control and individual agency within the collaboration. This is building off of the well-documented social dynamics present in performance, turning them on their head to dilute the interpersonal interaction to the degree that the only information the individual participants know is that they can make cool noises at the same time as other people. This, in their study, led to a variety of emergent social behavior, and was studied across 3 configurations, allowing for a different set of interaction patterns. I was particularly interested in the solar system. Simone's solar system configuration is quite simple. One of them, called the Sun, is the only one able to record a model sound. The analysis data from this model sound is then simultaneously sent to all other users, called satellites, to control their sound synthesis. I very much like the naming scheme and adopted it for the purposes of this presentation. My solar system begins with the sun, using an electric guitar as the audio source. The study involving Simone used an SM57 to capture vocal performance, but I prefer the guitar as it produces sound that only communicates emotion in an abstract and personally subjective way. 2 satellites receive the guitar input via passive splitter into their unique hardware for tonal modulation. Simone's study used the same processing interface for all satellites, but I felt something would be added by making use of 2 different hardware processors. In my case, the left satellite had control over a Fender guitar amp with FX options, and the right satellite had control over the Pod, a guitar FX processor booked from the Staffordshire stores. Simone's study aimed to remove the nonverbal social elements present in performance from the equation. I decided the easiest method within my grasp was to set up partition walls, courtesy of Adam. This removed the visual element and even dampened the physical movements of participants. Both satellites received mono input from the electric guitar and generated stereo output. The stereo outputs of both were sent via Live Room 1 patch bay to a DAW in Control Room 4, summed together, and re-amped out into Live Room 1 via stereo pair of Genlex, also courtesy of Adam. Adam's assistance in this setup cannot be understated. This setup allowed all three participants to listen to the final output of their joint performance in real time. My configuration pales in comparison to a dedicated software like Simone, but it does allow for the same collaborative experience, based on the same auditory information, very similar to the study. The performance is recorded in a DAW, both the direct input and a stereo mic setup, to capture the summed performance played into the live room. For the purposes of this presentation, all recorded audio has been combined so that the direct input recordings are most prominent, with the live room playback capture acting as the room mic, providing ambience. 3 performances were conducted, giving each participant a chance to experience every role and use all 3 interaction methods. These are some of the intended limitations, or rules if you like. No social interaction can be engaged in during each performance, verbal, body, etc. This might go without saying. Each participant is only able to contribute what their hardware allows. The guitar only has strings and tone knobs, and the amp and pod have their own respective sets of possible tone adjustments. This isn't necessarily a rule as much as it is a factor at play. No pre-planned compositional goals discussed beforehand. All attributes of the improvisation are configured in the moment. This might go without saying, however I will add that we agreed to randomize the hardware controls to the best of our ability at the beginning of each take, to avoid tonal bias from the previous take or preliminary practice. A 10-minute timer for each performance was introduced, ideally giving ample time to explore different ideas and transition between tonal concepts without dragging on. We'll come back to that. These are some of the unintended limitations, insofar as they may bias the social dynamic and performance. The position of the satellites relative to the stereo playback biases their interpretation of the auditory information. Many of the hardware modulation settings provide stereo information. The nature of their role requires a certain accuracy to which they can parse the performance elements, and this factor can only be a detriment to their experience in that role. As mentioned before, the satellite's hardware output is summed together into a stereo subgroup within the DAW before being reamped into the performance area. This introduces a variety of technical interactions that may create a less accurate auditory experience, most notably input lag, phase issues, frequency masking, and noise or artifacts. There's also a few additional facets. Electric guitar was chosen as the sun audio source given all 3 participants were comfortable using it to improvise for an extended period of time. Going off of Bailey's ideas regarding improvisation, technical skill is secondary to composing, and so the difference between participants, including their preferred genre and playstyle, was outright welcomed. Each performance was intended to last 10 minutes. However, I forgot to set the timer on more than one occasion. This led to a shared unspoken understanding that we were playing for longer than agreed, an understanding that was externalized in different ways. Reactions included unsure body language, detachment from the performance, drastic tonal changes, and even efforts to signal a conclusion was desired using their hardware. While no verbal or visual exchange was allowed, all 3 participants were well aware of one another's presence in the room. Each performance began standing together before taking position. This feeling of co-presence might have dissipated as no direct contact persisted, but will have undoubtedly influenced their level of collaboration in a way unique to Simmons' study, where participants were isolated in separate rooms. My compositional piece is more an experiment itself than a piece of experimental composition. My aim was to explore the boundaries of what joint collaborative composition is and means. The concept of group musicians, each with their respective instrument, performing an agreed-upon piece, has been dissected, dismembered, and woven back together into a procedure only reminiscent of its origin insofar as sound is being produced. For the purposes of this experiment, the sun is the instrumentalist and the satellites are the instrument. Where normally an improviser would be more or less aware of the tonal spectrum of their instrument provides, my experiment gives conscious agency to the instrument in defining its own timbre and character. This offers multiple angles of discussion in regards to the dynamic. The soundscape created is interesting and unique, only made more novel when the social factor is broken down for analysis. Simone was seeking to create a novel way of collaborative composition, exploring the social dynamic as it relates to creative awareness and cooperative difficulties. I'm interested in very much the same concepts, recreating this setup in a way where these social dynamics can be cleanly analyzed in their original context. While the entire hour-long performance is interesting sonically, we will examine the performance by highlighting moments of interest with respect to demonstrations of social cohesion and disunity. We are looking for examples within the performance of unspoken shared intent. That is, moments where the direction of the performance appears to be appreciated, celebrated, and engaged with by 2 or more participants at roughly the same time, implying they shared a desired direction that was fulfilled or achieved through collaboration. Leader-follower dynamics. Interactions indicating one participant has, intentionally or not, taken the role of a leader by establishing an alteration to the current performance distinct enough to force the other two to take the role of follower and work complementary to the new direction. This will mostly be biased towards the sun role, however, there are notable shifts in leadership throughout the performance. Incomplete collaboration or disharmony. Moments where one or more participants appear disengaged, disinterested, or seem to only subtly join in the collaboration. This is not always a sign of discontent, and on a few occasions seem to be a side product of simply enjoying the current soundscape. These interactions can be thought of as existing on a spectrum of high to low engagement. At one end, all or most participants are hyper-engaged and decide independently to go into a similar tonal direction based on their interpretation of the performance. At the other end, participants are barely engaged, expressing confusion, detachment, and even dissatisfaction with the current performance. Somewhere in the middle, participants are more or less on the same page, with one participant taking initiative to evolve the soundscape. For brevity, I'll refer to the left satellite and right satellite role participants as LS and RS respectively, and the sun role participant as sun. RS introduces modulation that seems to change the sun's playstyle, while the LS reacts very positively. This is our first example of the leader role shifting between participants. RS introduces radical change to established tone, leaving Sun visually caught off guard. This prompted Sun to change up their playstyle, but not by much, as RS retracts the modulation soon after. This is the first example of unilateral shared intent. All participants seem very engaged, offering only minor alterations to the output tone, seemingly all content with the direction for an entire minute. This collaboration seems to be broken at 8 minutes 40 seconds when LS decides to thicken the distortion at the same moment that the Sun repositions for a different playstyle, inadvertently letting the strings ring out. It's important to remember that without visual cues, each participant's intent can only be assumed by others. They are likely to assume that every action is intentional, which isn't directly hypothesized by the studies I've talked about, but I find it interesting as another means of analyzing the dynamic. The Sun begins playing with the intention of a slower, somewhat dramatic melody, in line with the cleaner, gently modulated tone the satellites are producing. While they incorporate a wooden rod to add variation, it does not appear that they wish to deviate much from this atmosphere. 26 seconds later, LS seems to reposition after looking at the camera, attempting to re-engage, yet not finding a way to do so until nearly a minute later. LS takes the leader role, seemingly incidentally, by introducing a complementary modulation. This seems to quickly re-engage them, as well as inspire the Sun to lean into the new tonal quality. Within 15 seconds, RS has followed suit, and seems to begin attempts at complementing this new performance. Interestingly, it seems that the alterations RS made sent LS back into a more passive engagement style within 10 seconds of their adoption. All the while, Sun is continuing this style of melody, either unbothered by or oblivious to the satellite's disharmonious back and forth. All participants appear to be experiencing a lower level of engagement, cohesion, and energy. No major changes are being made, and both satellites are only subtly adjusting their respective tone. This is an emergent behavior that the Simone study found, where, once stability was achieved, no participant seemed to take initiative in distorting it. It is almost 2 entire minutes before the Sun decides to radically alter the groove by using a wooden rod to introduce a more percussive direction, at 15 minutes 35 seconds, which seems to passively re-engage the satellites. While not necessarily relevant to the analysis, I find it interesting that both the Sun and LS decide to gaze in a similar direction at the same time. Both LS and RS express an almost synchronized body language chain. At 21 minutes 47 seconds, they both seem to disengage slightly, physically moving away from their hardware. And then, just 4 seconds later, they both simultaneously re-engage to almost the same degree. It's eerie, being honest, and a fantastic example of shared intent. The satellites are almost certainly having a very similar emotional reaction to the performance, and independently proceed to add some level of distortion, further supporting a shared internal aim. Sun takes the lead, changing timbre via guitar tone knobs, which is jammed with for the next 2 minutes. As the overall performance goes on, each chapter, for lack of a better term, seems to have more length and is less subject to radical change. This may be an emergent result of each participant becoming more in sync with one another's intentions. RS takes a more subtle later role. They adjust the delay in a manner that seems to pique the interest of the Sun, who begins using it as a tempo of sorts. This is the first example of a satellite having a temporal impact on the direction of the performance. The alterations that follow seem to only further inspire the Sun in what is perhaps their most engaged behavior yet. Starting at 30 minutes 19 seconds, LS is also seen reacting positively, albeit passively, to this tonal direction. While RS isn't outwardly demonstrating appreciation for the current performance, their hyper-engagement seems to support that this moment in the performance is a genuine example of deeply shared intent between all participants. Right away, the second performance demonstrates a core tenet of Bailey's view of improvisation. Tonal character and compositional direction are completely informed by all involved participants. In this case, the new son is familiar with playing guitar in a more harmonically familiar and traditionally accepted way. They are seen playing portions of melodies, chord progressions, and resolve dissonance and tension. This is very different to the previous guitar performance, where they employed a variety of techniques simply for the sake of producing an interesting noise. That biased the satellites towards experimental timbres and modulations, whereas this second performance is more centered around saturation and character, with the satellites rarely attempting to radically alter the son's established genre of play. LS seems to be having trouble distinguishing their contribution from the other satellite. In a moment of pure coincidence, RS turns their output level down completely, leaving the LS's contribution to be heard. This seems to surprise RS and reset the direction of their tonal collaboration. The son seems to react by adjusting the tempo at which they are performing in an attempt to match the LS's modulation. This is a somewhat silly example of incidental adoption of the leader role. All three seem to react to disengagement and disjointed collaboration in different ways. LS makes drastic changes to their tone. Son looks around, unsure of the direction of the performance, even grabbing a tool. And RS demonstrates disengaged body language, making only subtle changes. This is a more clear-cut example of disharmony, where it seems neither satellite is complementing the other, and the son themselves is confused on how to proceed, opting to radically change their playstyle in the hopes of a new groove emerging. Sun and RS both tap their foot in tempo to the tremolo modulation, but interestingly do so in a syncopated manner rather than directly in sync. This suggests that they are both in agreement as to the rhythm of the performance, but not on where the on and off beats are. I believe this is a sort of false shared intention with potentially interesting results, however the playstyle is changed up soon after, and this incongruence could not be observed further. LS completely disengages for a thoughtful few seconds to simply listen to the performance, seemingly basing their next adjustments on this short analysis. This is the first time we see any of the participants doing this, with disengagement usually being expressed as a passive and unmotivated adjustment to their hardware, certainly not in the thoughtful and purposeful manner demonstrated here. Another example of behavioral syncing between participants, as the Sun and RS stare at the camera at almost the exact same time. It's worth noting that from the perspective of the performers, the laptop recording is barely visible, and no visual information can be gathered. LS adjusts their hardware, incidentally producing a mechanical noise that catches the attention of both the Sun and the RS, provoking a pause and unsure expression from both. This time frame allows the aforementioned adjustment to play out for just long enough that it establishes a new direction for the performance. The LS seems to take the lead here tonally, with the RS jumping in to complement it, and the Sun changing the playstyle to better suit the soundscape as a whole. Within a minute, all participants are displaying engaged and entertained behavior, making this the second solid example of shared intent being unilaterally fulfilled. RS seems to ponder, perhaps unsure how to continue contributing, when, within the span of 7 seconds, the Sun changes playstyle, prompting LS to change their tone as well, giving RS the chance to reintegrate. This is less than a minute after the previous example, seemingly riding off of that momentum. Another thing to note is that LS and RS appear to be once again tapping and swaying out of sync with one another. It's hard to make assumptions about this, but it's safe to say that temporal alignment is not a major part of the collaborative effort during this section of the performance. LS expresses extreme disengagement, bordering on exasperated boredom. This level of disengagement does not seem to be unilaterally expressed, as Sun is quite focused on the performance and RS appears concentrated, at times even bobbing along. This level of individual disenfranchisement would likely be seen as a detrimental to the collaborative effort in a traditional jam session with body language and visual cues. This is a good example of why visual cues are more than supplementary to a collaborative musical effort. They don't just communicate intent. Visual cues and body language signal emotional status, something that humans are generally understood to care about. The lack of these signifiers results in oblivious entertainment and half-hearted cooperation. The finale of the performance seems to be the last example of shared intent. 1 minute and 30 seconds before the performance is called, both satellites have already halted radical alterations to tone, mostly attenuating their respective hardware output level. The Sun is signaling desire to come to a close by creating an energetic and busy build-up, something that seems to be understood by the other participants as the final climax. 30 seconds before the end, both satellites are staring forward at the camera, no longer attenuating, only waiting for the end they know is coming. It's actually impressive how on the same page they all are, nodding their heads when understanding of the intent was recognized. It's a very encapsulating and fitting interaction to cap the performance. So what was the point? What did we witness? I sought to recreate the social dynamics emerging from the Simone study, to observe, from the hot seat, what collaborative improvisation felt like, stripped of all social interaction. And it was cool. The analysis of my performance seems to support the existing ideas on how these limitations would impact compositional direction and interpersonal understanding. Many times during the performances, I was personally experiencing the very same social behaviors I sought to put to the test. I acted to complement the existing performance. I took charge and I led my friends down a different vibe. I got bored and I sat back. Between the three of us, these experiences proved both challenging and entertaining. I believed it also served as an excellent medium for the creation of experimental compositions, each performance baking in the dynamic and unpredictable nature of a multi-user instrument. There are perhaps more streamlined ways of performing this concept, but I believe my process produced beautiful soundscapes with plenty of social analysis to engage with, if appreciating the tonal character wasn't enough.